This is the Crimson Corner with Bill Riley.
Walks it into the end zone for a Utah touchdown.
Your source for the best insight on everything happening in and around Utah athletics. Now, here's the host of the Crimson Corner, the voice of the Utes, Bill Riley.
Welcome into the latest edition of the Crimson Corner podcast. I'm the play-by-play voice of the University of Utah, Bill Riley. It's great to be with you today on episode number 3 in 2026. As always, the Crimson Corner brought to you by our friends at Advanced Window Products, Utah's #1 window company, owned and operated by the mayor emeritus of Sac Lake City. That would be the great Nate Orchard. We appreciate them sponsoring this episode and every episode. I'm Bill Riley. Great to be with you. We have got a huge show today. Just a ton of stuff to get into today. The Utah football schedule was released this week for 2026. We'll talk about that. The portal additions have been made. At least some portal additions have been made for Utah football. We'll get to that. We'll project the two deep just a little bit, perhaps, on the show today. It's way early, but you can always have a little fun projecting the two deep. Everybody's way too early top 25 is out right now. Where do the Utes fit in the way too early top 25s for 2026? We'll talk about that today. We've got a very special guest coming up on the Crimson Corner today that I think you'll enjoy. The new offensive coordinator for Utah football, Kevin McGiven, is going to stop by. I have not had a chance to talk to Kevin yet, so this will be the first opportunity I have, and I think that you have, to listen to Kevin McGiven as offensive coordinator here at Utah. He's been on the job for a couple of weeks now. He's probably got a decent feel for who he's got personnel-wise. Most importantly, he's got Devin Dampier and Bird Ficklin back to be the triggermen of his offense. So we'll talk to Kevin McGiven on the program today, and we'll talk a little bit about basketball today as well. Rivalry game coming up on Saturday for Utah men. They go to Provo to play BYU for the second time in 2 weeks. And the Utah women are home with Texas Tech coming up on Saturday. So a lot to get to on this week's edition. As always, we love to hear from you. Comments, questions, anything you want to send. Hit me up on my email address, briley@huntsman.utah.edu. briley@huntsman.utah.edu. Something you want to hear me talk about. A topic you want me to broach on the program. A guest you would like to see join us, or just simply questions for me. I would love to hear from you. Maybe we'll get them on the pod. Maybe I'll answer them off air for you, whatever it might happen to be. Hit me up with an email, briley@huntsman.utah.edu. All right, let's start out with the football schedule release, which came out earlier this week. The Big 12 released its football schedule. Utah, of course, part of that for 2026. And away we go. 7 home football games coming up for Utah this year. That's a huge home schedule, highlighted by one big non-conference game. That's Arkansas. Big name. We'll talk about the Razorbacks in a minute. And then 2 really big conference games at home. I know. All Big 12 games, all conference games are big, but 2 sit above the others in my mind. That's the Houston Cougars, who had a surprisingly good year under second-year head coach Willie Fritz last year. They won 10 games. Houston comes to Salt Lake City, and BYU comes to Salt Lake City November the 7th. That's kind of the highlight names. Again, all Big 12 conference games are big, but those are the 3 biggies. Arkansas out of the SEC, it's a home-and-home schedule. Utah will go back to Fayetteville coming up in a couple of years. Then Houston and BYU. Only one bye week this year for the University of Utah. It's the first Saturday in October. Not the midway point of the season, but also not in September either. So you'll knock out a couple of conference games and some non-conference games, and you'll have your bye week the first week in October. Here's the tough stretch for Utah. Now, I will say, I'll give you my big picture thoughts on the schedule. But they've got a stretch from October 24th to November 21st where they play at Cincinnati, at Arizona, and at TCU, and home games with BYU and Houston. That's a tough 5-game stretch. Now, not all those teams are world beaters, but those are all good football teams, and 3 of those 5 games in that stretch are on the road. So I would say if you're looking at the schedule, that's the toughest long-form stretch. Probably the toughest back-to-back stretch would be that Houston-BYU, but we'll talk a little bit about that as we go here today. Utah does miss out on Texas Tech this year. No Red Raiders on the schedule. They'll go to Lubbock coming up in the future. They don't have Kansas State on the schedule this year. They'll go to Manhattan in the future. And they don't have Arizona State on the schedule this year, which is a first in quite some time not to have the Sun Devils. So those are the three big ones they miss. As for the non-conference schedule, they open up the season September the 3rd at home against the Idaho Vandals, and then they welcome Arkansas to town the following week, and then the next week after that, they will entertain the Utah State Aggies. Remember, they went up and played Utah State a couple of years ago in Logan. As far as Arkansas is concerned, this is what I would tell you about Arkansas. Traditionally, a very competitive program in the old Southwest Conference back in the day. They've been members of the SEC now for quite some time. The name right now probably looks better on paper than Arkansas is. They're coming off a 2-10 season, 0-8 in the SEC this past season. And to be very fair, they fired their head coach in season last year. That's never a good sign when you're getting rid of your head coach. It was Sam Pittman. He's now gone. They've got a whole new coaching staff coming in. There is some talent on that Arkansas team, but I don't really know at this point in time as we sit here in late January what exactly the Razorbacks are going to bring, but they were not a good team a year ago. This schedule, to me, it's a good schedule, but I don't think it's as good as even last year's schedule was when you had Texas Tech and you had BYU and you had Arizona State on that schedule, all ranked teams. I think this is a good schedule. I think this is a very manageable schedule for Morgan Scalley and his guys. I think it looks like a potential double-digit win schedule again for Utah football. Obviously, you've got to figure out offensive line. You've got to put some new, you've got a new coaching staff in place, all those things. And obviously, you always have to negotiate the injury situation as well. But if this team stays healthy, I really do believe with the talent they've got on the roster, we'll talk about some of that incoming talent in a minute or two, I think this is a potential 10-win schedule for Utah next year. I really do. And again, the non-conference season with Idaho, Arkansas, and Utah State, to me, is a manageable schedule for Utah. So if you have any thoughts on it, feel free to send them my way, briley@huntsman.utah.edu. Maybe we'll ask Kevin McGiven when he joins us here in a few minutes on the Crimson Corner, his thoughts on the schedule. And, of course, he'll be playing against a team that he coached for a year ago. That would be the Utah State Aggies. All right, we can talk about this a little bit now. The portal is closed. It closed last Friday. But Utah's made some nice additions in the portal this year. They addressed some real areas of need. And I would tell you, at least on the offensive side of the football, I think you can make a case that Utah's offense on paper may be even better at the skill position standpoint than it was a year ago. We know they've got to replace an entire offensive line. 2 tackles that are going in the first round of the NFL draft, and those 3 interior guys, which will all 3 of those guys will probably be on NFL rosters. That's the great unknown. But I think Morgan Scalley and his staff, when attacking the portal this year, did a really, really nice job, especially of upgrading the skill position. They had 2 really good, really proven wide receivers in Pagan and Scholes. These were guys that starred last year in the Mountain West Conference, one at Utah State, one at San Jose State. They were proven playmakers. Scholes was just over 700 yards receiving. He was a very unheralded kid coming out of high school who really popped a year ago. And, of course, Braden Pagan up at Utah State began his career at UCLA, but then had a breakout year last year at Utah State under the tutelage of Kevin McGiven, who we'll talk to here in just a couple of minutes. And then they added a kid named Ricky Johnson, who was a wide receiver at Mississippi State last year. He was a freshman last year, so he didn't play a ton. But the good news there is Chad Bumphus, who's the new wide receiver coach here at Utah, coached him a year ago at Mississippi State. So there's some internal knowledge of what this kid might be. Remember, just a freshman a year ago, I think he ended up with 3 catches. So I think the wide receiving core, and then when you factor the guys coming back, guys like Creed Whittemore, a guy like Larry Simmons, I think the Utah wide receiving core has a chance to be really deep and upgraded from a year ago. At the running back spot, they had a really nice back. Steven Chavez Soto. He's a young man who played as kind of the number 2 back as a true freshman a year ago at San Jose State and ran for about 500 yards and 6 touchdowns a year ago. He will be a really nice complement to Wayshawn Parker. Wayshawn's back in that Utah running back room. So Chavez Soto can almost play the role maybe next year of what Nakari Rogers did this past year, giving Utah a really nice 1-2 punch. And then remember, Daniel Bray, who we saw kind of pop at times last year for Utah, he's back again. So that's a really nice three-headed monster at running back for the University of Utah. Offensive line. We know there's some questions at the offensive line that Jordan Gross is going to have to kind of work through when you lose all 5 starters off your offensive line. But in the portal, they added 2 really nice players. Cedric Jefferson, who was a starting tackle for the national champion Montana State Bobcats. 1 AA national champions. Jefferson was a guy that started for them this year. And then Isaiah Kemma, who's a transfer from Ohio State, Texas kid who decided he wanted to get out of Ohio State and play here. I think those 2 guys are likely to battle for starting spots. I don't think anybody right now has anything locked down definitively, but those are 2 positions they added for some depth and challenging for starting spots in the portal. Then on the defensive side of the football, they added corners. Chenault and Reed, 2 proven group of 5 starters. 1 kid at South Florida, that was Chenault, and 1 kid at Akron, that was Reed. I think those guys come in. It's a pretty good corner room right now that Sharif Shaw will be dealing with. I think these guys add to the depth there and compete for playing time. And then along the defensive line, where they lost some players to the portal, they've added some. Lucas Samsula comes in from Wyoming. He is a big plugger of a defensive tackle. And then you've got Jeremo, who came in from San Jose State, who played at defensive tackle. And then you've got a transfer from Tennessee by the name of Wallace, who will also come in and play for some time. And then you've got Ford at the defensive end spot, who I know that Colton Swan likes a lot, who will add some depth and rotation at defensive end. At worst, you've added quality depth. At best, you might have a starter or 2 come out of this group this year. So I think what Morgan and his staff have done, and they're not done by any means. They're plugging and playing. Jackson Benny's brother, Noah, has joined the program. He's a tight end. He was an all-Big Sky tight end at Weber State this past year. So you're going to probably see some more names added to this, but these are the big names that they've added so far, and I think they've done a nice job of addressing starting quality depth and overall quality depth at all those positions, especially on the offensive side of the football at the skill spots. And then you've got guys coming back from last year. Remember Hunter Andrews. He was being used as a weapon by the offense last year by Jason Beck in the offense. Then he got hurt in the Wyoming game. He's going to be back. Nate Johnson will be back with this team as well. So there's plenty of weaponry, but as I said at the very top, the fact that you've got Devin Dampier and Bird Ficklin coming back, huge pieces for Kevin McGiven to build around right now for Utah football. All right, the way too early top 25s. These don't mean anything. Let's start right here with saying these things don't mean anything, but they're great conversation pieces. And what they show as much as anything else is the respect that media folks have for the program, whether it's the coaching, the history, or whatever it might happen to be. And Utah appears in the 2 big way too early top 25s right now. ESPN and The Athletic. I consider those to be kind of the big 2. ESPN.com, Mark Schleybaugh does it for them, and at The Athletic, my friend Stuart Mandel does it for them. Both of those organizations, both of those individuals have Utah in their way too early top 25. ESPN's got Utah at number 25. The Athletic's got Utah at number 24. And to be very fair, most of the questions around Utah center on the portal losses. Utah lost some guys in the portal, and of course, a coaching staff and a proven Hall of Fame caliber head coach who, stepped aside and now he's someplace else. But Utah being barely in the top 25 right now is perfectly fine. What that shows is there's good talent in the program, and there's good respect for Morgan Scalley and his reputation for taking over. So the respect is still there for Utah football. Now they just have to kind of prove who they are. And the beautiful thing is, when you play a Power 5 schedule, you get a chance to do that. And there's only 3 teams right now in everybody's preseason way too early top 25 from the Big 12, and Utah is one of those 3 teams. Texas Tech and BYU are the other 2 teams. So I think it's a nice kind of nod of the cap to where Utah has been and what they bring back this year. And really what Morgan Scalley has built on a reputation as a defensive coordinator, but now stepping in as head coach. And again, you can't emphasize this enough. having your starting quarterback back, having depth at your starting quarterback. I'll say this right now. I don't know that anybody in the country, and I mean this is not me wearing crimson goggles right now. I'm not sure that anybody in the country has a better quarterback situation than Utah does at their starting position and at their backup position. Based upon all the reps and what we saw from Bird Ficklin a year ago, to have him back for another year and to have him in position to back up Devin Dampier. And we'll talk to Kevin McGiven about this as well, because Jason Beck did a nice job with this too. You know, I don't think Bird Ficklin's going to be standing on the sideline the entire season holding a clipboard and a headset on if Devin remains healthy. I think that you find a way to utilize. There's too much talent there. And Kevin McGiven did that a year ago with a guy that was a backup quarterback at Utah State. He actually turned him into a wide receiver and used him as a weapon for the Aggies. I'm not saying that that's the plan that he'll take with Bird Ficklin, but I find it hard to believe that Bird Ficklin won't be used in some way, shape, or form this coming year as a weapon for Utah football. And back to Devin for just a minute. I think I said this on the last week's pod, but I do believe he's got a really good chance to be an all Big 12 quarterback this year. He was the Big 12 newcomer of the year this past year. He was the third team all Big 12 quarterback. He doesn't have a lot of competition in that room. There's good quarterbacks in the Big 12, don't get me wrong. But there aren't very many coming back that had a better season than what Devin Dampier did last year. And I think with the improved weaponry around him, he'll have a real chance to do that. A guy like Sorsby, who's gone to Texas Tech, he'll be in that conversation. A guy like Bear Bachmeier down at BYU, he'll be in that conversation. And I would probably say Noah Fafita as well at Arizona, because they had a good year last year and they're probably poised to have a good year again this year. He'll probably be in that conversation as well. But I like Devin Dampier. Seeing what I saw as he made that jump from New Mexico to Utah in year one, especially if he can stay healthy and stay on the field, I think he's got a great chance to be not just the quarterback of the year, but maybe offensive player of the year in the Big 12 Conference this year. We'll talk about all that and more coming up with our special guest today here on the Crimson Corner. That's Utah offensive coordinator Kevin McGiven. He'll join us next. Stay with us.
Here's another insider interview on the Crimson Corner podcast.
Back on Crimson Corner, special guest today. Glad to finally talk to him. I think our paths have probably crossed somewhere along the line. I know they did one year way back in 2002 when I was working sidelines at KSL doing BYU stuff, and he was, I think, a grad assistant at BYU. Kevin McGiven, how are you?
Yeah, doing good. Yeah, it's been a long time since those days. Hopefully, I'm a little bit more seasoned than.
Well, those were the early days. Thanks for doing this, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. No
You've been on board a couple of weeks now.
Yep.
You starting to settle in, feel at home?
Yeah, I don't know if there's ever that feeling in year one. It's just like everything feels a little bit unsettling going into recruiting and spring ball and fall camp, and and so you just take it for what it is and just kind of attack it, take it day by day, and get done what you can. So.
Was it inevitable that you would end up at Utah, since I think you've checked the box at just about every other school you've coached at here in the state of Utah?
So I don't know if inevitable, but when people would ask me, I was like, yeah, that might be the only one that I haven't been to yet. But but I guess hopeful that at some point I would have the opportunity.
So, if my math is correct, and I'm not good at math, 24 years in coaching. 10 stops. Does that sound right for you? Not 10 different. I should say 10 different stops. Some you've doubled up on, right?
Yeah, I think. I guess this would be 10 because I think it was 9 before that. So, but yeah. So yeah, it's been a long ride to get here and a few stops.
So how do you connect with Morgan? I guess that's the thing. I mean, the coaching world is big in many ways and it's small in many ways, and obviously here in Utah as well. So. How do you and Morgan cross? Did you know each other? How did you connect for this job?
So had met each other a couple times, and but I really think just through some Utah connections, guys that I've worked for and friends that I have, working for Gary Anderson that obviously was here with Morgan, and working for Ron McBride at Weber State that recruited Morgan. So there's and then friends on the staff here, obviously friends with Kalani and A-Rod and those guys that all have history with Morgan and Derek Odom, those that I've been with for a long time at San Jose State. So
I don't know how many fans have done the deep dive on you, but you're a Utah guy. Walk us through a little bit of your background, growing up, where you grew up, your football background before you kind of got into coaching.
Yeah, so I grew up in just down the road in Orem, Utah. Moved there when I was really young from the Bay Area, and went to Mountain View High School. Met my wife there. We met when we were sophomores in high school, so she's been on this journey with me, and so. Playing career-wise, I got recruited at Eastern Arizona Junior College out of high school, and didn't have much of a playing career there, and ended up coming back home. Was kind of going to Utah Valley, and then got an opportunity to go walk on at Louisiana Tech for Gary Croton, that I ended up as a graduate assistant for at BYU. So had a short stint at Louisiana Tech. Had some injury issues and things like that, and really. He brought me into his office at Louisiana Tech and was like, "Hey, you're not a very good football player, but maybe you could be a good coach." And so he's like, "You do want to take a swing at that?" And at the time, still had to finish my degree. Home was back in Utah. Came back and finished my degree. He ended up going to the Chicago Bears, and then coming. Taking the head coaching job at BYU, and then that's when I kind of got on first as a volunteer, and then as a graduate assistant in 2001. I think I was on the offensive side, and at the time Kalani Stocky was the defensive graduate assistant. So, did
you play with Tim Rattay at La Tech?
So Tim Rattay was the quarterback.
Okay.
So I didn't play with Tim Rattay, but I was on the same team as Tim Rattay briefly, and he might have thrown me a couple balls in one-on-ones or in routes on air or something like that. So.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember that stuff. That's one of the advantages and disadvantages of getting old is you've seen a lot and you remember a lot. Yeah. And Rattay was a stud at La Tech.
Oh yeah, really, really talented quarterback, and was throwing to a receiver, Troy Edwards at the time, that was just lights out too.
So when did you know coaching was what you wanted to do? Because you've been doing it now for 24 years, so clearly it's stuck. But when was it? Was it when Gary talked to you? Was there an epiphany at some point in time when you were a graduate assistant or something that said, "Yeah, I want to do this"?
Yeah, I think that probably planted the seed, and then it was just probably like a lot of college kids go through, and I'm married, and then just trying to figure out what to do. What am I going to get my degree in? What am I going to do with this thing? And then really ended up. Before I was even a graduate assistant at BYU, calling the head coach at my high school, at Mountain View High School, seeing if there was an opportunity there. He let me come out and, kind of work with the tight ends at Mountain View High School. I was going over to BYU at the time and kind of volunteering, just a student assistant, breaking down film, things like that. And then, just being around those guys, and then it kind of evolved into getting that position.
So you've got Gary Croton, you've got Ron McBride, you've got Gary Anderson, you got Brent Brennan, you got Bronco Mendenhall. I know there's some others in there. Who do you think had the biggest impact on you as a coach?
Definitely in the early days, Gary had a significant impact on me with what he was doing, and I was trying to learn, and then I was trying to be able to help coach and apply offensively. But it was kind of a one back offense. Today's terms, there would be some crossover air raid guys in there. And so there was a heavy influence there. And then when I took that knowledge and kind of branched out on my own, going to, it was really interesting. My first job at Southern Utah in 2005 was after Urban was here. They were doing a lot of things spread offensively, and so trying to learn whatever I could from what they were doing. They were kind of the hot thing at the time with some of the things they were doing with Alex Smith, and playing option football and doing some really cool things. So just try to pick up what you can, but, really kind of a spread, one-back philosophy. And then I got with Ron McBride at Weber State, and he was like, "Oh, no. We use a fullback, and we're going to play in 21 personnel." So, then I kind of had to try to mesh those philosophies. Okay, how are you going to use the tight ends in this deal? How are you going to use the fullback? And so really trying to kind of mesh philosophies together. But I would say those two, with Ron McBride and his influence and Gary with his, and then it just, been able to learn from a lot of really good coaches along the way.
It's funny because you've been around the state a bunch. I've been here for 24 years, as long as you've been coaching here, but we've never crossed paths for whatever reason. So when you got the job a few weeks back, I was talking to a lot of people because I don't know you. I've seen some of the places you've coached, but I was asking people like Mac, my friend Kevin White, who you know up at Utah State, some other people. I was just like, give me an idea of what Kevin McGiven wants to do. And what everybody came back to was Kevin McGiven is very adaptable. Kevin McGiven is a guy that likes to do things that fit what his personnel are. So I know you've gotten this question a bunch, but for our listeners out there who are very curious, you know how fans are. Hey, we had a great offense. What are we going to do? You got Devin Damon. So if you had to kind of describe your philosophy or how you like to run your offense, Kevin, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say definitely multiple and always trying to. And I guess it's really a lot of the places that I've been and what we had to do at some of those places. If you're not the top dog in recruiting and it's just kind of, okay, what's the best available guy I can get at this position or this position, and may look different from year to year. And so, some years the tight end room looks better. When I got up to Utah State this last year, it was Bryson Barnes. Okay, what does his skill set look like?
We know that guy.
Yeah. And then I'm looking at the skill players around him, and at that time we brought in a couple receivers from the portal. Didn't really know what they were going to give us. The tight ends were injured and weren't able to go through spring ball. And so I looked at our running back room, and there were like 8 guys in there, and all really good athletes and versatile. And so I was like, okay, we probably need to get in some 30 personnel or something like that. We give this a little bit of an Air Force triple option type look. So it's just always taking the skill players, but first and foremost, trying to center around the quarterback, what they're capable of, what they do best, what they're comfortable with, but steering it toward their skill set and looking at your offensive line, obviously what they do best. That can be different in terms of what protection looks like, the run schemes that you want to master, and then evolving from there, based on just the pieces that we had in place and being able to adapt to that. I think we kind of found a niche when I was at San Jose with the usage of our tight ends, running kind of a spread system, but running it in 12 personnel, because that was a really deep, versatile room for us. And those guys had, unique skill sets as both blockers and pass receivers. So that became a conflicting element for defenses, as we kind of tried to make a run there in that league. So,
if you would have told Utah fans 4 years ago that Bryson Barnes would eventually end up as an all-conference quarterback, I think people would have gone, really? but I mean, he had a nice run here a couple of years ago when Cam Rising was hurt. Then he left for, an opportunity to play a little bit more. And you had him this year, and he was truly a dual-threat quarterback for you. I mean, I think he threw for over 2,500 yards and ran for 700-plus yards in your offense this year. And he was one of only a handful of quarterbacks. Devin just missed doing that. He came up just shy on the passing side. But one of 6 guys in D1 to do that. What was it about Bryson that you saw and you're like, okay, we can work with this?
Yeah, really early on, it was just his mindset. Walked into that place and Bryson just, I mean, you guys have been around Bryson, but just, he kind of exuded confidence and leadership and work ethic and toughness. But he's walking around the building, he's like, okay, what are we doing here? What are we talking about? What are we going to run? And so this, kind of the initial meetings with him and figuring out where he was at, just how much knowledge he had retained and from the guys that he had been around, things that he had done systematically. Obviously, going back and watching some of his skill set, knowing that he was a pretty good athlete that we could utilize in with his feet, quarterback run game, and then really didn't find out just as a passer, as a decision maker when we got into spring ball and trying to implement elements into our offense that were from some of those pass heavier offenses. The year before I'd been in a run and shoot, and there were elements of the run and shoot that I wanted to install and figure out how we could present those concepts into a multiple style and fit it to our personnel. And so I watched him making pretty consistently good decisions and and showing repetitive accuracy with kind of a full range of throws, and I was like, okay, I think we can open this up a little bit for him. So,
yeah, I used to talk to Andy Ludwig about this when he was here. He said the number one thing he wants in a quarterback is a good decision maker, because I can work with everything else, but if you make bad decisions as a quarterback, that's hard to deal with. I need to know what you know and what you're thinking before snaps, because we can work with the other stuff.
Yeah, and that's really what Bryson showed, was that could make good decisions and could distribute the football the way that we needed to. That ultimately, based on your decision making and where the ball lands, especially when you're playing option heavy or a progression based offense, where is it getting to the right spot enough? But I can't take credit for Bryson's success, like how hard he worked at it, and what an awesome kid to coach. All his success belongs to the work that he put into it. I mean, he was putting in hours upon hours, and just an incredible person to coach.
You're going to get another good kid this year. I know you know this already, because you've probably met with him, talked with him over the last couple of weeks, but Devin Dampier's back. That's huge news for you and for the football team to be able to build around that piece. Newcomer of the year in the Big 12. You probably saw him when you were at Utah State seeing highlights, but did you see him much when you were at San Jose that year before?
Did you
guys cross
over?
Saw him
a little bit, just with some crossover film, and and that's something I've. It's funny, when I was a graduate assistant at BYU in 2004, Jason Beck was one of the quarterbacks in the room.
I remember,
that year. So I'm friends with Jason. Have followed him and tracked his career, and then watched, I love to learn, and so they were doing some really good things at New Mexico. So it's like, okay, what is he doing over there? And but there was some crossover study with some common opponents, but we didn't play them that year. And so I was able to see some of the things that they were doing with Devin, and ways he was trying to capitalize off his strengths and utilize him in that offense, and then obviously coming here to Utah, and then even taking that to a greater extent, but just what an amazing kid, what an amazing athlete, and really excited for the opportunity to work with him.
Knowing what you know about his game and getting to know him now just a little bit too, what has you excited about what you want to do or what you can do offensively with Devin? And let's be fair with Bird Ficklin, his backup quarterback, who I know you hope you have Devin for every game, but if you don't, you've got a good backup plan there too.
Yeah, I think first and foremost with Devin is he's very eager. What the things that they were able to do with him, obviously did a really, really good job with capitalizing off his skill set. He's a true dual threat, and he is very cerebral. Just in the times that I've met with him, he's retained a lot of information that has been given to him over the course of time, and he's been able to go out and apply it. When you watch film with him, he has a very high level of what's going on. And so, part of the conversations with him, okay, Dev, where do you think you need to develop? What can we, what do we need to put on display, to take you to the next level in your game, possible preparation for the NFL, and where at the same time it's impacting our team and helping us win football games. But I think that's the thing that he's excited about is we see you running around, we see you making plays, doing all these things, but is there a higher level of application, with certain things, application to defense and studying those things, where just to make you a more complete player and continue to evolve, continue to grow. And then having Bird in that room, I mean, you really got to get creative, and make sure that he can impact games on Saturdays, because he's a special talent. Another one, awesome kid, great work ethic, very cerebral. To go along with his athletic ability, and then what kind of conflict can that cause when you have both those guys on the field together, or whatever that's going to look like in terms of packaging. But really cool thing, it's a really, really good problem to have.
Morgan likes to use the term stressing a defense. Do you feel like you've got tools and weapons right now, and as you add to it, that can stress defenses?
Yeah, I think so. There's different ways that I've done that in the past, but it's really fun to bounce ideas off. Whether it's in recruiting or whether it's football schematics, really cool to bounce ideas off Morgan. Just something, a defensive coordinator that's as seasoned as he is, that's had that much success. But we were just talking about today, like when he sees someone in the recruiting process, he's like, yeah, that guy would give us problems. It's like, okay, you want to listen to that and say, okay, yeah, let's go get that guy. You're in a room and you're talking football, and Morgan's like, yeah, that would be really hard to defend. And so you really listen to those things, and then with those players, it's like, okay, that guy in that position really creates a lot of conflict in how we want to defend that. Whether that be a quarterback, whether that be a tight end, whether it be a back that's kind of in a multiple role as a slot or a back, and so really figuring out all those pieces. But from what I've seen to this point, I think there are some of those pieces in place definitely that not only can create conflict or demand defensive attention, but also that can be used in some different ways to create that conflict reduction.
Speaking of pieces, Kevin McGiven for a couple more minutes with us here on Crimson Corner. You're having to kind of install your philosophy and do it with a new staff too. These are guys that you're working with mostly for the first time. So how has, I'm guessing that's the first part. You got to get everybody on your staff on the same page together and then take it to the players. So how's that kind of getting to know process with the offensive coaching staff?
Yeah, love how that staff came together. Some of them that were here or in place, and then other guys that Morgan allowed me to have some say in building that thing out, and guys that I had some experience with. But I think even more so, the way that Morgan goes about making his hires is, you're not just going to hire guys that are friends, because they're a buddy or whatever, but doing your homework and finding the right fit. And so a couple of guys that we were able to bring in that I have history with, and then some of the guys that were already here, but really coming together, like Jordan Gross. That guy's a superstar.
Yeah.
And just in the conversations I've had with him and the dialogue, obviously hasn't been in this position at this level, but once the game planning piece of it comes, and the application of scheme to defense at this level, I mean, once those pieces all come together, you have a really, really good offensive line coach on your hand. And then we're able to bring back Chad, that has some history here coaching wide receivers and from Mississippi. And so it was kind of his dream job to go back home, but hadn't had the opportunity to interview Chad and talk to him, and then the conversations, and really, really similar philosophies, and I think that's going to be a really easy transition. And then wanted to make sure that when I had an opportunity to get a tight end coach, someone with Big 12 experience recruiting and developing, and someone that I had a history with at Utah State and got to see that firsthand in Luke Wells, and then with Ryan Gunderson,
you coached him, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, so I didn't coach Ryan,
okay.
But so when I first got to San Jose State, he was the quarterback coach there, and I was kind of a walk around coordinator. And so part of his development as a young coach, I think was working with me or under me.
Well, you coached him as a coach.
Yeah,
you coached him as a
coach.
Yeah.
And same thing, but but I watched his development as a coach. I watched his development of quarterbacks. I watched what he was able to do with DTR at UCLA, and how he was able to get those guys to play. But another one was like, I think when I'm coaching those guys, like if I'm sitting in a room with Devin and you look at the whiteboard after an hour, then you would have zero idea of anything we were talking about. And so Gundy really compliments me in that regard, is like, okay, Dev, here's what he means. We're going to break it down. We're going to simplify it a little bit and, put it in terms that make sense, because I can get a little erratic and get all over the place with my thoughts. But he really does a great job simplifying, streamlining, getting things to a point where those guys can process and make those, accurate decisions that we're talking about. And so really love how it's come together. Still starting, guys have been out on the road and things like that. So when we get back in here, then we're really going to take a deep dive into the install and putting this thing together.
All right, two more things and I'll cut you loose, Kevin. You guys have made some portal additions, and you've been a part of that and adding to and supplementing the roster that was here already. Give me an idea of what kind of the mindset was and some of the targets you guys had, and what has you excited about some of these guys coming in?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, addressing a couple needs at receiver. That was one of the, at least in numbers, was one of the deficiencies that we had addressed in bringing in. I think we had 3 spots available for that, and so some of the guys that were in the portal at the time, first and foremost was Braden Pagan,
who and coached last year.
Yeah, so had the opportunity, coming from UCLA to Utah State, so watched his development, watched what he became, and then when I got here and saw the need, it was like, okay, I think this is a guy we can probably take a swing at. Had some things going on, but I think the ways we were able to utilize him and the relationship, was, I think attractive for him. He had been recruited by Coach Bumpus out of high school to come to Utah, and so there was already an existing relationship there, and so it ended up working out in our favor. And then brought in Kyrie Scholes. Didn't have the opportunity to coach him at San Jose, but I recruited him to San Jose. Both myself and Coach Odom recruited him to San Jose. He was ineligible the first year there with some of the things coming out of junior college with progress toward degree and stuff like that. But really develop, part of the relationship with him was just like keeping him sane because he couldn't play, and having those conversations in our office. And so we got pretty close. But I was able to in practice see that he had a skill set that I thought translated to this level, and he was able to put that on display this past season at San Jose as well. And so a couple of those guys, I think the running back position, brought in another one, Steve Chavez, someone that I had the opportunity to recruit out of Orange Lutheran. When we went out and got that position, felt really good about what was coming back with Wayshawn. Obviously, yep. You've got your bell cow there. Knew we had a really, really solid, talented young back coming in that Markey had already signed. And so it was really just trying to be able to go get someone that younger back that just could come in and grind and, have a positive influence on that room, and then just come in here and work at it and kind of carve out their role. And then some of the guys that we've, offensive line,
yep.
Something that we had to address there. And so, bringing the center from Ohio State and bringing in a couple of the tackles and so trying to address things there to make sure that we have, enough possibilities and enough depth, enough competition, and then some really, even though there's inexperience, there's some really talented guys in that room and that group has been really, really hungry to learn from those guys, which has been really good to see. So,
all right, last thing. What's job number 1 when spring ball begins?
Job number 1 when spring ball begins. I think the biggest thing is probably just making sure that our culture is taking hold. I think there's kind of a what you do, and then there's a how you do it.
Right.
And I think the biggest thing that you want to see first and foremost, the execution is always going to take time offensively, and you're going to figure out those parts as you go. But try and really making a concerted effort to align with Coach Scalley's cultural philosophy and what he wants this team to look like, how he wants them to play, not just being from a defensive perspective, but that the offense is carrying that culture too. And so, really it's just getting out there and those guys, giving total effort, and putting everything they have into it. And if they're able to do that, they attack each day with the right mindset, then the other stuff is going to come. So,
hey, thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I know you're busy. You got a lot going on, but I appreciate catching up with you. We'll see you this spring.
Okay. Sounds good.
There you go. Kevin McGiven with us here on the Crimson Corner.
The best insight on all things Utah athletics. It's the Crimson Corner Podcast.
A big thank you to Kevin McGiven for joining us on the program today, Utah offensive coordinator. He was fantastic. I hope you guys enjoyed that. We'll do our best over the next coming weeks as we get towards spring football, having some of the other new faces and new names on that Utah coaching staff on with us. But really appreciate Kevin taking a few minutes, and, of course, appreciate our friends at Advanced Window Products for being the title sponsor here. Let's hop from football to hoops. It's a big weekend coming up for both the Utah men and the Utah women. It's rivalry weekend again for the Utah men. It was just 2 weeks ago that they played Utah played BYU up at the Huntsman Center. Well, in the quirk of the schedule this year, they head down to Provo on Saturday afternoon at 3:30 to play the BYU Cougars. And The Utes are now, this is weird to say too, we're a third of the way through the conference season already. We're 19 games into the season. We're 2/3 of the way through the season, and we're a third of the way through the conference season. Utah right now 1-5, coming off a really tough loss the other night in Manhattan, Kansas against Kansas State. It was a game that was there for Utah to take. It really was. K-State was down 4 players, 2 starters in that game. Utah battled. It was a good game. It was a 1-2 possession game really almost all the way through, especially in the second half. But Utah's inability to guard the ball really hurt them the other night, guarding the ball. And I know Alex emphasized that with us on the postgame show, myself and Sean Mooney. But if they've got to be a little bit better at guarding the basketball and making those plays when they need to make them on the offensive end as well. Alex has said this. He said it on the postgame show. He said it on his coach's show with me the other night. He wants his players to focus more on the team than their personal goals. Sometimes you can kind of get caught up in getting yours or getting a bucket. I think if he can get those guys locked in on the big picture team stuff, that's going to go a long way. It's not going to get any easier Saturday. The Big 12, there's very few off nights, if any off nights. And they've got to go into arguably as tough an atmosphere as there is in the Big 12 right now. That's down in Provo at the Marriott Center. The good news is Utah saw them just 2 weeks ago, and they went toe-to-toe with BYU just a couple of weeks ago, lost 89-84 in that game. But they had their opportunities at the Huntsman Center to win that game against BYU. They did a pretty good job on A.J. DeBonsa, the future perhaps number 1 pick in the NBA draft. What cost Utah ultimately in that game were extra possessions and offensive rebounds. I think Richie Saunders ended up with 6 offensive rebounds in that game, and some of them late to buy him extra possessions and buckets. Still, Utah had a chance to tie that game late, and they turned it over late. So we'll see what they could do. The effort they brought at the Huntsman Center is exactly the effort they're going to need on Saturday afternoon in Provo. But they're going to have to clean up some of those mistakes they've talked about, especially the ones they committed on Tuesday night in Manhattan, Kansas. Sean Mooney and I will have the call of that game for you on the radio network. 3 o'clock pregame show with a 3:30 tip time from Provo as we'll bring you that game. The atmosphere will be great, and I'm really anxious to see if Utah can match the intensity they brought the first time around. BYU is very good. BYU is a top 10 caliber basketball team. But Utah's seen them, and they know they can play toe-to-toe with them. Now can they match and meet that energy and fight back against that environment on Saturday? We'll see, and we'll have that broadcast. I'm anxious to bring it to you. By the way, the Cougars, they've had all week to prepare for this game. Their last game was last Saturday in Lubbock against Texas Tech. They got beat. It was their first Big 12 loss of the year, so they've had a week to get ready for this game. Now, I will say they've got number 1 Arizona coming to Provo on Monday night. So maybe, just maybe, there's a little bit of a look-ahead factor. I doubt it, because you very rarely look past a rivalry game. But we'll see what plays out coming up on Saturday in Provo. 3:30 on the radio and on the stream, and that's where you'll be able to find me and Sean Mooney. The Utah women will be home coming up on Saturday. 5 o'clock start time at the Huntsman Center. They've got a huge game against Texas Tech. Texas Tech was really good until the other day. They lost back-to-back games. They began the season 19-0. They've dropped back-to-back games. So Utah has already beaten the nationally ranked team at home. They beat TCU at home a couple of weeks ago, and they're playing good basketball right now. Gavin Peterson's team is at 14-5 on the year and 5-2 in Big 12 play. So we'll see if they can get a good atmosphere going at the Huntsman Center. That game's on ESPN+. It's also on 92.5 FM in Salt Lake City. Tyson Ewing will have the call of that. And we'll see what can happen. By the way, Utah women's basketball right now in bracketology is an NCAA tournament team. Charlie Cream does that bracketology on the women's side of things at ESPN.com. And right now, Utah is in the field as a 10 seed. So still some work to be done, obviously, but playing very good basketball right now and a chance to get another win against another ranked team coming up on Saturday at 5 against Texas Tech at the John M. Huntsman Center. One other note to throw in. Next Wednesday, the University of Utah baseball team will have the grand opening of their brand new Charlie Montfort Field at America First Ballpark, the brand spanking new crown jewel of baseball right on campus. They're doing the ribbon cutting and the grand opening on Wednesday, and it should be a big time. I'm lucky enough to be able to MC that event on Wednesday, and I've had some behind-the-scenes tour of this ballpark. I'm just telling you right now, if you love baseball and you love Utah, just come out. Beginning March 6th is the opening game against Grand Canyon, and then they'll have a whole year worth of baseball at the brand new park on campus. It's beautiful. It's got all the amenities. It's got everything that a big-time college baseball program needs to be successful, and most importantly, it's right on campus. So the students will be right there. It's on Guardsman Way, butts up right next against Sunnyside Park if you're in Salt Lake City and familiar with that. Really right across the street from the football facility and the indoor facility, and it should be a lot of fun. So that'll be coming up on Wednesday the 28th. And, the ribbon cutting, you'll see all the photos and all the coverage of it at utahutes.com. But make plans this spring to come out and watch some baseball. I know Gary Henderson's really excited about the baseball team he's putting together this year, but I could just tell you, having seen that park behind the scenes, it's going to be beautiful and spectacular and a great spot to watch baseball in the spring at the University of Utah. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Crimson Corner. Thank you again, as always, for listening. If you would, do us a favor. Go rate us. Give us 5 stars. Give us a thumbs up. Write a nice review on the Crimson Quarter wherever you get this podcast, whether it's iTunes or Spotify or wherever you might happen to find it. And, we like that. And if you ever have questions that you want answered or topics brought up, don't hesitate to drop me a comment, briley@huntsman.utah.edu. Big thank you to Kevin McGiven for joining us today. Big thank you to Nick Boulderjack for producing this today. I'm Bill Riley. We'll talk to you next week on the Crimson Corner.
You've been listening to the Crimson Corner podcast with Bill Riley. Bill is back next week with the latest on Utes. Download previous Crimson Corner episodes on all major podcast platforms.